I never thought that in my old age I would have to prove my right to be in my own house. A house I had built with my own hands more than 30 years ago, when Vallejo was not yet such a sprawling city, but a quiet place with few buildings. Every nail hammered in, every tile laid, was soaked in my sweat, my hopes, my dreams for the future. In those years, Eliza and I believed we were creating a family nest that would unite more than one generation of Tanners. Our son Bryce was just a toddler when we moved into the newly completed house on Old Glen Road. I remember him taking his first steps on the wooden living room floorboards, which I sanded myself for weeks to achieve the perfect smoothness. I'm 68 now. I've been a widower for 5 years. Eliza passed away after a long battle with cancer. 39 years together ended in a hospital room, where I held her hand until the monitor showed a straight line instead of the usual heartbeat spikes. After she died, the house felt too big and empty. 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a dining room, all that space suddenly became an echo of the past. Every corner reminded her of her: the kitchen where Eliza made her famous blueberry muffins, the garden where she grew roses that won prizes at local fairs, the chair by the window where she liked to read on rainy days. It was during that period of loneliness and longing that I made the fatal mistake of suggesting that Bryce and his wife move in with me. My son, a talented electrician, had been married for 4 years to Olivia Pratt, a dental receptionist. They were renting a small apartment in neighboring Benicia, and I thought they were struggling financially. "Dad, are you sure?" Bryce asked then, when I voiced my proposal over Sunday lunch. "The house is big, but living together, it might be difficult." "What's complicated?" I dismissed it. "There's plenty of room for everyone. You'll have the whole second floor to yourselves. You'll be able to save for your own house, and I won't be so lonely." Olivia smiled across from me, but I saw her glance back at Bryce. At that moment, I ignored the intuition that told me this wasn't a good idea. The longing for companionship, the fear of loneliness, all drowned out the voice of reason. A month later, they moved in. Things went relatively smoothly for the first few weeks. Bryce helped me with porch repairs. Olivia occasionally cooked dinner for everyone. We even had board game nights, like when Bryce was a teenager, and Eliza and I taught him strategic thinking through games of Monopoly and Risk. But gradually, the idyll began to crumble. The first cracks appeared over little things, those very minor household habits that turn into irritants when people live under the same roof. "Gilbert, would you mind not turning the TV up so loud?" Olivia asked one morning on our way down to the kitchen. "We can hear every word upstairs." "I'm sorry," I said, turning down the sound of the morning news. "I'm getting old and my hearing isn't what it used to be." She nodded, but something in her gaze told me that this was just the beginning. And indeed, my list of infractions grew every day. There was my taking too long in the bathroom, or leaving an unwashed cup in the sink, or talking too loudly on the phone. And then there were my gardening habits. For many years, I continued Eliza's tradition of tending the rose garden. It became a kind of therapy for me, a way to stay connected to my departed wife. Every morning, regardless of the weather, I spent at least an hour in the garden. "Dad, do you really have to mow the lawn at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning?" Bryce asked one day, looking out his bedroom window. Olivia and I wanted to sleep in. "All my life I've been gardening in the morning, son," I replied. "Num, the sun's not so hot at that time." "But you're not the only one living here now," he said with a note of irritation in his voice that I'd never heard before. It was then that I first realized the bitter truth. The house was no longer mine. Although I was still technically its owner, my rules were no longer the law. Moreover, I increasingly felt like a guest, an unwelcome guest, within my own walls. Since retiring 3 years ago, my daily routine had irritated Olivia even more. 35 years as a tax preparer had taught me the value of order and routine. I got up at 6 in the morning, had breakfast at 7 sharp, lunch at noon, and dinner at 6 in the evening. I watched the news at 8 and went to bed at 10. "Gilbert, do you have to rattle the dishes every morning at 7 sharp?" Olivia asked one day, appearing in the kitchen with circles under her eyes. "I'm working late, and I'd like to get some sleep." "You could just close the bedroom door," I suggested, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "That wouldn't solve the problem," she cut me off. "Maybe you should consider eating out. There's a great senior center where—" "I'm not going to eat rubber food among half cadavers just because you're annoyed by the sound of my cutlery." I interrupted her, feeling my blood boil. This is my house, and I'm going to eat breakfast in my kitchen. Bryce, who had heard our altercation from the stairs, interjected, Dad, please don't say that. Olivia was just offering an option. An option to get rid of me, I mumbled, heading out into the garden. Bryce had always been on my side before. We'd been especially close as kids. I'd taught him how to fish, how to fix a car, how to work with electricity. It was thanks to my lessons that he eventually chose to become an electrician. We could spend hours discussing complex circuits, new tools, interesting projects. But after I married Olivia, something changed. Slightly at first, then more and more. Our conversations became shorter, our meetings less frequent. And when they moved in with me, paradoxically, we became even farther apart. I understood the reason. Olivia. She wasn't the kind of woman who easily accepted other people's rules. Powerful by nature, with ambitions far beyond her current position, she saw me as an obstacle, a hindrance to their family happiness, their plans, their future. In her eyes, I was not a father to her husband, but a burden, an aging, stubborn man taking up too much space. She never said it outright, but I read it in every look she gave me, every sigh, every eye roll when I shared memories over dinner. Dad, you already told this story last Sunday. Bryce reminded me gently as I started to remember the trips Eliza and I had taken. And the day before that, Olivia added with a strained smile, can we talk about something else? Little by little, I began to notice how I was being pushed out of the common space. My pictures of me and Eliza, that used to be on the mantelpiece, had moved to the bookcases in the corner. My favorite chairs in the living room had been replaced by a fancy couch that Olivia had picked out without my input. Dad, we're just freshening up the decor, Bryce explained, seeing my displeasure. This furniture is 20 years old. 25, I corrected. Sorry, and it was chosen by your mother. Mom would want the house to look modern, he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. It's amazing how quickly people start speaking for the dead, attributing their wishes to them. Eliza loved these chairs. She chose them with such care that the salesman at the furniture store was ready to run away after the third hour of trying them on. Gradually, I began to spend more and more time in my bedroom or in the garage that had been converted into a workshop. There, among the tools and unfinished projects, I still felt like the master of the situation. I was still myself, Gilbert Tanner, not the old man, the father-in-law, or the problem. The situation worsened about a year ago when Olivia's mother, Veronica, began visiting regularly. This woman, who looked like an aged carbon copy of her daughter, had an amazing ability to express disapproval without saying a word. One glance at my garden shoes in the hallway was worth 1,000 rebukes. Gilbert, my mom just cares about cleanliness, Olivia explained when I'd expressed my displeasure at my son's mother-in-law's constant remarks. She's allergic to dust. She's allergic to me, I countered, and she acts like this is her house. She's a guest, Olivia reminded me. And we're supposed to make it comfortable for guests. I wouldn't mind a comfortable environment either, I muttered as I left. Veronica had suggested the idea that had been the beginning of the end. On one of her visits, sitting at the dining room table, my custom-made oak table, she remarked casually, You know, Gilbert, a lot of people your age prefer to live in retirement communities. There's medical care, socializing, hobby classes. It's much more comfortable for a single person. I almost choked on a piece of chicken. I'm not alone, I objected. I have a son. He's entitled to his own life, she added softly, glancing at Bryce and Olivia. A young family needs space. There's enough space for everyone, I said, running my hand around the dining room. It's a big house. It's not just about square footage, Veronica sighed. It's about privacy, about being able to live your own life without certain restrictions. I shifted my gaze to my son. He was studying the contents of his plate with such interest as if it were an encrypted treasure map. Olivia looked at her mother gratefully. That night I thought for the first time that I might have made a mistake inviting them to stay with me. But where could I have gone? This house was my whole life. Every corner held memories. This was where Bryce took his first steps. This was where Eliza first showed me a positive pregnancy test. And this was where we celebrated our 30th anniversary. I couldn't just give it all up. And legally, I owned the house, although after Eliza died, I signed over half of it to Bryce, a goodwill gesture, an acknowledgement that someday it would all be his. I'm not going anywhere, I said quietly but firmly, looking Veronica in the eye. This is my home. Of course, Gilbert, she smiled with fake sympathy. No one's kicking you out. I was just suggesting an option that might be convenient for everyone. Convenient for everyone. The phrase haunted me for days afterward. Convenient for who? For Olivia, who could finally hang her minimalist paintings instead of my family photos? For Bryce, who will no longer feel guilty seeing his wife and father conflicted? Or for me, who, at 68, has to start a new life among similarly old men playing bingo and discussing their sores? Number. I built this house with my own hands. I'd lived in it most of my life. And I wasn't going to leave just because a young woman with ambition thought I was interfering with her plans, but I didn't know how far she'd go to get rid of me. And I certainly didn't realize that one day I would take a desperate step that would change the lives of all of us. As is often the case in life, small problems have a way of escalating to catastrophic proportions. I've never been one for drama, but what has been happening in my home over the past few months has been nothing short of a war of attrition. It all started with a change in our routine together. We'd had dinner together at least once in a while, but now that family tradition was completely gone. Olivia was staying late at work, and Bryce was eating dinner in the bedroom in front of the TV more and more often. At first, I tried to keep up the semblance of family life, cooking for everyone, calling to the table, but after a few weeks of talking to empty chairs, I gave up. Dad, you have to understand, Olivia and I have our own schedules, Bryce explained one day when I tried to figure out why we couldn't have dinner together anymore. We're adults. I'm an adult too, I replied, and I thought family was about people spending time together, not avoiding each other. No one is avoiding you, my son sighed. It's just that we have a lot on our plate. Olivia wants a promotion, and I'm taking extra orders. For what? I asked. You live here for free. I don't charge you for utilities or food. Bryce looked at me with an expression I'd only seen on Olivia's face before, a mixture of annoyance and condescension. We're saving for our own house, Dad. We can't live with you forever. The phrase hurt more than he'd realized. Of course, I knew that sooner or later they would want to live apart. But the way he said it, it was like I wasn't a father, but an annoying roommate. The days began to merge into an endless series of petty bickering and awkward pauses. I found that many of my habits that had seemed natural for decades were suddenly a source of constant conflict. My love of classical music, which I turned on in the evenings, annoyed Olivia, who preferred silence or modern tunes through headphones. My habit of reading the newspaper at breakfast, yes, the paper newspaper I'd been subscribing to for 30 years, elicited condescending smiles from her. Gilbert, there are news websites in the 21st century, she said one day as she watched me flip through the pages of the morning paper. They're updated in real time, not printed with news from 24 hours ago. I like the smell of printing ink, I replied, and the feel of paper under my fingers. But it's so impractical, Olivia shook her head. And it's not environmentally friendly. Think of the trees. I planted 15 trees in my backyard, I countered. I think I have a positive tree balance. She rolled her eyes and walked out of the kitchen. It was the first time that day that I noticed that Bryce, who was sitting next to me and silently watching our altercation, didn't smile at my joke for the first time. His face remained impenetrable, and his gaze avoided mine. Changes were taking place not only in our relationship, but also in the physical space of the house. My things that used to be in the living room, fishing magazines, a special pillow for my back, the TV remote tuned to my favorite channels, were slowly disappearing or being moved. I just put them away in your room to keep it neater, Olivia explained when I couldn't find my reading glasses. Common spaces should be free of personal belongings. And those interior design magazines? I asked, pointing to the stack of glossy publications on the coffee table. They're personal items too. They're sources of inspiration for the renovations Bryce and I are planning, she cut off. It's for the good of the house. Renovations. That word was another stumbling block. Olivia was always talking about the need to refresh the interior, to modernize the space, to breathe new life into the rooms. For me, every wall, every corner was exactly as it should be. Familiar, cozy, native. Dad, you have to admit the house is a little outdated, Bryce told me after another discussion of possible renovations. Some things need to be replaced. What things? I asked, looking at my son. What's wrong with the house you grew up in? The kitchen appliances are outdated. The bathrooms look like they're from the 90s. The carpets need to be replaced, he began. And Olivia's right about the color scheme. Those dark green walls in the dining room are too gloomy. Your mother chose those colors, I said quietly. We painted these walls together. There was a pause. I could see Bryce struggling with himself. On the one hand, mentioning his mother always worked on him. On the other, he clearly didn't want to give in. Mom would understand about moving forward, he finally said. She'd always loved change. That was a lie. Eliza was the most conservative person I knew. She wore the same hairstyle for 30 years, bought the same clothes, preferred tried and true restaurants to new places. But I didn't argue with my son. It was clear whose words he was using. Olivia's influence on Bryce was becoming more and more apparent. My son, whom I knew to be a straightforward, honest guy, began to avoid direct conversation. He began using streamlined phrases, evasive answers, diplomatic language, all the things that had always characterized his wife. Bryce, can we talk straight? I asked him one day when we were alone together. What's going on? What do you mean, Dad? He seemed genuinely surprised. About what's going on in this house. About how you've changed. About how you and Olivia are trying to force me out of my own house. No one's trying to force you out, he sighed. It's just, we need to compromise. What kind of compromises did I get? I asked bluntly. I gave you the whole second floor. I let you change the furniture your mother picked out. I put up with constant comments about my habits. What did I get in return? Bryce looked away, avoiding my gaze. Companionship, he said finally. You said yourself you were lonely. Loneliness among people is worse than being alone, I answered. At least when I was alone, I could watch TV at a normal volume. Dad, stop being so dramatic, Bryce grumbled. Olivia just wants everyone to be comfortable. Everyone or her, I clarified. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said it all. In that moment, I finally realized that I'd lost my son. He was no longer the boy who came to me for advice, who laughed at my jokes, who defended me when a teacher at school unfairly criticized me at a parent-teacher conference. Now there was a stranger standing in front of me, a physical copy of my son, but with a completely different content. The situation got worse when Olivia's mother, Veronica, started showing up at the house more and more often. She went from being a Sunday visitor to a permanent fixture in our lives. First she stayed for dinner, then overnight, and soon she was spending entire weekends with us. Veronica was the kind of woman who always knew what was best. She had an opinion on everything from politics to the proper storage temperature for cheese. And of course, she had very clear ideas about what a decent home should look like. Gilbert, she said to me one day at breakfast when we happened to be in the kitchen together, I noticed that your curtains in the living room are a little outdated. I saw some beautiful samples at the new store on Sonoma. I like my curtains, I replied, spreading jam on my toast. They keep the heat in well in the winter. But they're so heavy and dark. Veronica shook her head. The current trends are light, airy. Olivia was showing me the changes she and Bryce were planning. It's going to be a real makeover. A transformation of what? I asked, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. The house I'd built? Or me? An old man who doesn't fit in with your current trends? Veronica looked hurt, but not surprised, as if she'd expected such a reaction. Gilbert, no one's saying you don't fit in. It's just that young people need space to express themselves, to start a family. And do you think I'm in the way? I asked you bluntly. You're not in the way, she sighed. But you have to admit that the presence of a parent in a young couple's home creates certain restrictions. It was then that I first wondered if this was an allusion to Bryce and Olivia's intimate life. The thought was ridiculous. Their bedroom was on the second floor, at the opposite end of the house from my room. I physically couldn't hear what was going on in there, even if I wanted to. What kind of restrictions are you referring to exactly? I asked. Well, you know, Veronica made an indefinite gesture with her hand. Freedom, spontaneity, the ability to have parties with friends. I've never forbidden them to invite friends, I objected. In fact, I almost always go to my place when they have guests. Exactly, Veronica said, as if I'd confirmed her argument. Prerunt, you have to go to your place. Isn't that normal? Wouldn't it be better to have your own space where you don't have to hide from anyone? This house is my space, I said firmly, and I'm not hiding from anyone. I'm just giving them a chance to spend time with their friends without the old man around. Veronica shook her head with the look of someone talking to an unreasonable child. Gilbert, I understand your attachment to home, but think of the future. Grandchildren, for instance. Wouldn't it be better if Bryce and Olivia raised them in their own home without, I'm sorry, no outside interference? Interference? I asked, feeling the blood rush to my face. I'm an outsider to my grandchildren? That's not what I meant, Veronica corrected quickly. I was talking about interfering with their upbringing. Each generation has its own methods, its own values. And mine are obviously as outdated as the curtains in the living room? I was being sarcastic. The conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Olivia, who entered the kitchen with a smile that disappeared instantly when she sensed the tension in the air. What's wrong? She asked, shifting her gaze from her mother to me. Nothing much, Veronica answered. Gilbert and I were discussing modern trends in interior design. And grandchildren, I added. The ones your mother thinks I'm going to bring up wrong because of my outdated values? Dad, Bryce interjected, appearing in the doorway. No one said that. I didn't say it, but I implied it, I countered. See? Olivia turned to her husband. That's why it's impossible to have a normal conversation with your father. He's always making things up for everyone else. I'm not making things up, I countered. I was just calling things by their proper names. Bryce, Olivia ignored me, addressing her husband directly. You promised to talk to your father. Talk about what? I asked, looking at my son. Bryce looked confused and clearly not ready for this conversation right now. We wanted to talk about remodeling the second floor, he finally said. We need more space. For what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We're planning a baby, Olivia said, as if she were announcing her appointment as president of the country. And we need a nursery. There are 3 bedrooms on the second floor, I reminded her. Dash yours, a guest room and an office. Turn the guest room into a nursery. But where will my mom live? Olivia objected. I didn't immediately understand the meaning of that question. Is your mom going to live here? I asked, shifting my gaze to Veronica, who looked too happy for someone not involved in the decision. Temporarily, Bryce hastened to explain. While we're busy with the baby, we're going to need help. And you decided to do this without consulting me, I said. We wanted to plan it first, Olivia said, and then we'd present you with a solution. A solution, I repeated, feeling something inside me snap. In my house, without my involvement. Dad, Bryce stepped forward. Let's talk calmly. This is your house too. Really, question mark. I grinned bitterly. I was under the impression that I was like a piece of furniture, something to be tolerated until I could throw it away. Nobody's going to throw you out, Gilbert, Veronica interjected. We're just discussing the best option for everyone. For everyone or for you? I repeated the question I'd asked Bryce earlier. There was a heavy silence in the room. I could see Bryce avoiding my gaze, Olivia exchanging significant glances with her mother, Veronica trying to maintain a benevolent expression that didn't reach her eyes. You know what? I finally say, getting up from the table. Plan whatever you want. Decide without me. After all, what does some old man's opinion matter? Dad, Bryce started, but I held up my hand to stop him. Don't, son. I get it. Life doesn't stand still. Things change. But don't pretend to ask my opinion when all you really want is for me to agree with the decision you've already made. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling their gazes on me. For the first time in a while, I thought seriously about actually leaving, finding a small apartment where there wouldn't be this constant tension, this need to justify my existence, this feeling of being an extra in my own home. But where to go at 68? To start anew, giving up everything that was dear to me? From a house that had been home for most of my life, where every corner reminded me of Eliza, of our life together, of the happy days when Bryce was a child. In the days that followed, the situation only got worse. I felt an invisible but impenetrable wall forming around me. Bryce, Olivia, and Veronica often spoke in low voices, silencing themselves when I entered the room. They would hold family councils in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep or busy in the garage. One day I overheard Olivia and her mother talking as I walked past the open living room window. "Mom, I don't know how much more I can take," Olivia said. "He's watching my every move, criticizing everything I do." "Patience, darling," Veronica replied. "Sooner or later, he'll realize that it's better for everyone if he moves out." "But he's so stubborn." Olivia sounded annoyed. "Bryce says he can't push his father, that he's too attached to the house. But we can't live like this forever." "You can't," Veronica agreed. "But there are other options." "What are they?" Olivia asked with sudden interest. "The house is really big," Veronica said. "Maybe we should think about converting the basement or the garage into a separate apartment for Gilbert, with its own entrance, kitchen, bathroom." "That would cost a lot of money," Olivia countered. "And besides, he'd still be here on the property." "But not in the house itself," Veronica emphasized. "Think about it, darling. Sometimes compromise is the best solution." I stepped quietly away from the window, feeling a cold rage growing inside. They were discussing my fate as if I were an unintelligent child or a senile old man who couldn't decide for himself. They planned to evict me to the basement or garage, the house I had built with my own hands, which I had paid for with my years of labor. At that moment, I made the decision not to give up without a fight. It was my home, every brick, every beam, every bit of ground around it. And if they were so eager to get rid of me, they were going to have to try a lot harder. I had no idea how far this conflict would go. And I certainly didn't realize that I would soon have to face the open hostility of the woman my son had chosen as his life partner. A woman who was willing to do anything to get what she thought was rightfully hers. My home, my life, my space. Some days begin normally with no sign of change to come. That was the case that Saturday morning. I woke up at 6 as usual, made coffee, and went out on the back porch to admire the garden. The fog had not yet cleared, giving the rose bushes that Eliza had once planted an almost mystical look. At times like this, I could almost feel her presence close by. The day promised to be warm, typically September in Vallejo, when the heat of summer gradually recedes, but still offers genuinely balmy days. I planned to spend time in the garden. A few roses needed pruning, and the lawn on the south side of the property had long been asking for attention. By 8 o'clock, I had finished breakfast and changed into my work clothes. The house was quiet. Bryce and Olivia usually slept until 9 or 10 on Saturdays, and Veronica, who'd been a guest for the second week, rarely left her room before noon. I went out into the garden, looking forward to a few hours of peaceful solitude. Working with plants always calmed me. It was a kind of meditative process, a way to organize my thoughts and take my mind off my troubles. The golden celebration rose, Eliza's favorite variety, needed special attention. I noticed the first signs of powdery mildew on it and decided to treat the bush with a homemade solution of baking soda and vegetable oil, an old recipe my wife had taught me. The work went on as usual, and I did not notice how it was lunchtime. When the rose garden was done, I started the lawnmower. The old machine, which had served me for more than 15 years, started on the third try with a distinctive roar. I knew the noise would wake the household, but it was 11 o'clock, a reasonable time to start mowing. I was about a third of the way across the lawn when I noticed Olivia standing on the back porch. Even from a distance, I could tell she was in a bad mood, arms crossed over her chest, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a thin line. I turned off the mower's engine and took off my earbuds. "Good morning," I said, trying to be polite, even though I could tell by the look on her face it was going to be anything but. "Really?" she said instead of greeting me. "A lawnmower on a Saturday morning?" "It's almost noon," I said, glancing at my wristwatch. "I'm honest. Besides, it's supposed to be hot today, so I'd better get it over with now." "My mom was trying to sleep," Olivia said in that tone one used when talking to a delinquent child. "She's had a rough week, and you're making a—" She circled the lawn. All this," I repeated, feeling a familiar wave of irritation rising, "is called gardening. The garden in my house, the house we all live in," Olivia corrected, "and we have to consider each other's needs." Does anyone take into account my need to mow the lawn when it's convenient for me? I asked. You can do it later, she said, or hire a gardener, as I've suggested many times. That was another sore subject. Olivia was always insisting on hiring professionals for the jobs I'd always done myself, from gardening to minor repairs. For her, it was a matter of status. For me, it was a matter of independence and self-respect. I'm not going to hire anyone to do a job I'm perfectly capable of doing myself, I said firmly, and I'll finish mowing the lawn today. I put my headphones back on and reached for the starter on the mower, but Olivia quickly came down from the porch and stood between me and the machine. No, she said, looking me straight in the eye. Not today. My mom is staying until Monday, and I want her to have a chance to rest. Step back, please, I said calmly, though I was already boiling inside. I've been mowing lawns on Saturdays for 30 years, and I'm not going to change my habits because of your mother's whim. Whim? Olivia raised her voice. Wanting to sleep in on your day off is a whim? At noon? Yes, I answered. Normal people don't sleep until lunchtime unless they've been working all night. It was a low blow, and I understood it. Veronica didn't work anywhere. She lived on alimony from her ex-husband and Olivia's help. Her hard week consisted of shopping and watching TV shows. Olivia's face turned red with anger. How dare you? She hissed. My mother came to help us prepare for the baby, and you... What baby? I interrupted. As far as I know, you're not even pregnant yet. We're working on it. She cut me off. And it would be nice to have a little family support instead of constant criticism and sabotage. Sabotage? I almost laughed. Mowing the lawn on your own property is now called sabotage? Our argument was interrupted by Veronica's appearance on the porch. She was in her robe, with her hair curled, and she looked really sleepy. What's going on? She asked, squinting against the bright sunlight. Gilbert decided that Saturday was the perfect day to mow the lawn right outside your window, Olivia explained, glaring at me angrily. Oh, Veronica paused as if searching for words. I realize that tending to the garden is important, but maybe you could do it in the afternoon. I'm taking a medication that makes me drowsy. And... What kind of medicine? I asked bluntly. As far as I knew, Veronica was not suffering from any serious illness. That's none of your business, Olivia said sharply. Medical information is private. When it's used as an argument against me in my own home, it becomes my business, I countered. It's okay, honey. Veronica made a conciliatory gesture. I have a migraine, Gilbert. I'm on some pretty strong medications that help with the pain, but make me drowsy. That's why adequate rest is so important to me. I doubted the veracity of this story. In the 2 weeks she'd been with us, I'd never once seen her take any medication or complain of a headache. But to argue further was to look heartless. Okay, I finally said, letting go of the mower handle. I'll finish the lawn later. Thank you, Veronica exhaled with a look of martyrdom. I really appreciate your understanding. Olivia continued to stare at me in disbelief, as if expecting a catch. I'm serious, I assured her. I'll continue this after lunch. She nodded reluctantly and went up to her mother's porch. I was left alone on the uncut lawn, with the lawnmower idling and a growing sense of resentment. Determined not to waste time, I moved on to another part of the garden, further away from the house, where I could get to work weeding the beds of perennials. It was quiet work, not requiring machinery, but no less important. Around 1 o'clock, I heard the sound of the back door opening and saw Bryce coming out onto the porch with a cup of coffee. He looked around, spotted me among the bushes, and headed in my direction. Hi, Dad, he said as he came closer. Olivia's mom says you two had a little misunderstanding about the lawnmower. Such an misunderstanding, I repeated, straightening up and shaking the earth off my knees. Yeah, you could say that. Your wife forbade me to mow the lawn because her mother was supposedly on some mysterious migraine medication and couldn't sleep with the noise. Bryce wrinkled his nose. Dad, Veronica does have a problem with headaches, and Olivia is really worried about her mother. Is it really that hard to wait a couple hours with the lawn? It's not about the lawn, I said, looking my son in the eye. It's that I'm being systematically deprived of my right to control my own home and my own time. No one's taken away your rights, Bryce sighed. We're just trying to accommodate the needs of everyone in the house. Everyone but me, I said. My needs somehow always came last. That night, after Bryce, Olivia, and Veronica had gone into town for the weekend, I sat in my old chair, going through photo albums. I took a particularly long look at the pictures that captured the construction of this house. Every brick, every beam laid by my hands. The house was more than just a structure. It was the materialization of Eliza and I's love, our hopes, our labor. When Olivia and Veronica returned the next day evening without Bryce, they said he was in town for a client meeting, I noticed a change in the living room. Where Eliza and I had hung our wedding picture, there was now an abstract painting. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the painting. "Where's our picture?" "I put it in the closet," Olivia said nonchalantly. "It didn't go with the new curtains. It was the last straw. All the months of tension, all the small and large grudges had poured out into pure, unadulterated rage." "Put the picture back," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm not putting it back," Olivia said. "And don't tell me what to do in my house. Your house." I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. I built this house with my own hands. Every board, every nail, every tile on the roof. "Times change," Olivia countered. "You can't cling to the past forever." Without answering, I headed for the closet to find a picture of us. Olivia rushed after me, trying to stop me. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. "Don't touch my stuff." "I'm looking for a picture of Eliza and me," I replied, continuing my search. "I won't stop until I find it." "Stop it right now." She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away from the closet. I shook off her hand and continued my search. At that moment, Olivia took a step back and pulled out her phone. "I'm done," she said, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number. "I'm calling the police." "What?" I turned around, not believing what I was hearing. "The police? For what?" "For aggressive behavior," she answered quickly. "For threatening me and my mother." "I wasn't threatening anyone," I countered. "I just want our picture back where it belongs." "You're unstable," Olivia continued, staring at the phone screen. "You're aggressive. You're a danger." I looked at Veronica, who was standing off to the side with a look of feigned fear on her face, then shifted my gaze to Olivia, who was holding her finger over the call button. "You wouldn't dare," I said. "Yes, I would," she said. "Leave or I'll call the police, right now." I stood looking at this woman, young, beautiful, confident, and realized she wasn't bluffing. She was really ready to call the police, make me look like the aggressor, maybe even get a temporary order banning me from the house. And Bryce wasn't here. My son, who could have taken my side, protected me. But would he protect me? Or would he choose to trust his wife, as he'd done so many times before? "Okay," I finally said, stepping away from the closet. "I'm leaving. But don't think this is the end." "Oh, it's over," Olivia replied confidently. "The end of your control over this house and our lives. Bryce agrees with me. You need help, Gilbert. Professional help." I silently turned and walked out of the living room, feeling my face burn with humiliation and anger. In my room, I sat on my bed, trying to calm down and get my thoughts in order. Threatening to call the police was the last straw. This was no longer a conflict over different tastes or habits. It was open warfare over my house. And I was losing. Or was I? Suddenly, I remembered a conversation I'd had with my son after Eliza's death, when we discussed the inheritance. In a burst of paternal generosity, I'd offered to sign over half the house to Bryce as a guarantee that he wouldn't have to pay a huge inheritance tax when I was gone. We drew up the papers, but there was one detail that only I knew about. The papers contained a clause about my lifetime right to use the house, standard legal wording suggested by my friend Edwin, who worked as a real estate lawyer. At the time, it had seemed like a mere formality. I didn't think I would ever have to assert my right to live in my own home. Now this formality could be my salvation. I decided to call Edwin. Despite the late hour, the situation was urgent. When Edwin answered, I briefly outlined the situation, trying to keep my voice low so Olivia and Veronica wouldn't hear. "Edwin, I need your help. Do you remember the deed to the house we signed 5 years ago? There was a lifetime use clause." "Of course I remember, Gilbert. What happened?" "It's a long story, but the point is, they're trying to get me out of my own house. And I want to know if I can undo that transfer? Get the house all to myself?" There was a pause on the phone. Then Edwin spoke slowly. "Technically, It's possible. The thing is, there's one small mistake in the documents. When they were drawn up, not all the papers were properly authenticated. That could be used to void the entire deal. I felt a warmth spill inside, a mixture of relief and anticipation. What do I have to do? I asked. Come to my office tomorrow, Edwin replied. I'll make all the arrangements. But Gilbert, are you sure you want to go this way? It could ruin your relationship with your son. I grinned bitterly. That relationship has already been destroyed, Edwin, and not by me. After my conversation with my friend, I went to bed with a clear plan of action. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a helpless victim of circumstance, but a man in control. Yes, it was a risky move. Yes, Bryce probably wouldn't forgive me for it. But what choice did I have? Tomorrow I'll go to Edwin and start the process of getting full rights to the house. And then we'll see who's kicking who out. The morning was overcast. The heavy clouds over Vallejo matched my mood, dark but determined. I was up early, packed and out of the house before Olivia and Veronica woke up. Bryce wasn't due back until later that evening, so I didn't have to worry about seeing him. I drove to Edwin's office, gripping the steering wheel of my old Buick tightly. The car was almost 20 years old, but I kept it in perfect condition, just like everything else I own. The thought made me chuckle bitterly. I'd always taken care of my things, my family, my home. Now I had to fight to keep anything of mine. Edwin's office was in a small two-story building in the business part of town. Despite the early hour, my old friend was already there. I could see the light in the windows of his office as I walked up the stairs. Gilbert, Edwin met me at the door. I'm glad you decided to come after all. We'd known each other for over 30 years since we'd worked together at the IRS before he'd decided to retrain as a real estate lawyer. Edwin was one of the few people I trusted unconditionally. Did you think I'd change my mind? I asked, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. I hoped so, he admitted honestly. This is a big step, Gilbert. Are you ready for the consequences? I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. Was I really ready? To revoke the deed of gift? To take from my son the half of the house I'd given him? Maybe it seemed cruel, unfair. You know, I began slowly, when I signed over half the house to Bryce, I did it out of love. I wanted to secure his future, to save him the trouble when I was gone. I paused, but now I realized that for Bryce, and especially for Olivia, it wasn't a concern for the future, but a chance to control the present. My present. Edwin nodded without interrupting. They want to control my house, my life, I continued. They don't just change the curtains or rearrange the furniture. They're systematically pushing me out of the space I've created. Yesterday, Olivia threatened to call the police because I wanted to put my dead wife's picture back where it belonged. I see, Edwin sighed. The situation had really gotten out of hand. More than that, I agreed, and I was left with no choice. Either I got the house back or I was going to be thrown out on the street, or worse, in some nursing home where they've been meaning to send me for years. Edwin opened the folder on the table in front of him. I've been going over the paperwork we did 5 years ago, he said. As I suspected, there's a technical error that could be used to invalidate the gift. What kind of mistake? I asked, leaning forward. One of the supplemental agreements is not notarized, Edwin explained. It's a document that confirms your lifetime right to use the house. According to the law, without proper notarization of this clause, the whole transaction can be recognized as invalid. And what do you have to do? File a petition with the court. Given the obvious error in the documentation, the case should be decided in your favor. After that, you'll be the rightful owner of the house again. I thought about it. A lawsuit meant publicity, open conflict. Bryce would learn of my decision not from me, but from a subpoena. That didn't seem right. Was there no other way, I asked? A more peaceful? Edwin adjusted his glasses, looking at me with understanding. There is an alternative. We can draw up documents for the voluntary return of the property, but that would require Bryce's consent, which he won't give, I finished for him, especially if Olivia finds out. Probably, Edwin agreed. Maybe I should talk to my son first, though. Explain the situation. Find a compromise. I shook my head. I'd tried, Edwin, many times. But Bryce, he's not the man I knew. He's completely under the influence of his wife. Any argument I make will be misrepresented to her, and she'll find a way to turn it against me. Then there is only the judicial route left, Edwin concluded. I can have the necessary documents ready by tomorrow, but you must be absolutely sure of your decision. I looked at the photograph on Edwin's desk, a picture of him with his wife and 3 grown children, a happy family supporting each other, something I had once had. I'm sure, I said firmly. Get the paperwork ready. The next 3 days passed in a languid wait. I applied through Edwin, trying to act like I was at home. Bryce did return that evening, but to my surprise, he didn't mention the conflict with Olivia. Either she hadn't said anything to him, or they'd decided to opt for the ignore tactic of pretending nothing had happened. I'd remained silent too, immersed in my own thoughts and plans. Now that the process was underway, I was thinking a lot about the future. What would I do with the house when I got it back? Continue living together with my son and daughter-in-law? Knowing what had happened? It seemed impossible. The relationship was hopelessly damaged. The idea of selling the house didn't come immediately. At first I thought about just restoring justice, returning what was rightfully mine. But gradually I began to realize that even if I won the legal battle, living under the same roof as Bryce and Olivia would be unbearable after that. Selling the house seemed like a drastic step, but at the same time, it seemed like the cleanest solution. I'd get enough money to start a new life somewhere else, and Bryce and Olivia would have to find a new place to live. Maybe this would be a lesson to them. On the 4th day, I got a call from Edwin. Gilbert, we have a favorable decision, he said without preamble. The court has declared the deed of gift null and void because of procedural irregularities. The house was all yours again. I felt a strange warmth inside me. Not triumph, not joy, but relief. It was as if the heavy weight that had been weighing on my shoulders all these months had finally been lifted. Thank you, Edwin, I said, for everything. You're a true friend. You're welcome, he said. But Gilbert, now you have to do the hardest thing of all. Tell your son. I know, I sighed, but there's something I have to do first. After talking to Edwin, I immediately contacted the realtor, Lana Perkins, an energetic middle-aged woman with whom we had once worked together at the IRS. She was surprised by my decision, but didn't ask too many questions. The house is in great condition, in a good neighborhood, with a large lot, she said appraisingly as she inspected my property the next day. I think we can put it on the market at a very attractive price. I need a quick sale, Lana, I said. I'm willing to give up a little on the price for the sake of speed. She looked at me carefully. Gilbert, we've known each other for years. I stay out of your business, but is everything all right with you? I smiled weakly. I'll be fine when this house passes to its new owners. Lana nodded, not needing any further explanation. I'll get right on it. I suggest we don't have open houses, but work directly with potential buyers. It'll be quicker and delicate. Thank you, I said sincerely. That's exactly what I needed. All this time, I tried to act as discreetly as possible. I'd set up the meeting with Lana while Bryce was at work and Olivia and her mother were out shopping. I signed the papers in Edwin's office. I made phone calls when I left the house on the pretense of going for a walk. I knew that sooner or later the truth would come out, but I wanted to delay it until the deal was done, or at least until there was a real buyer with a concrete offer. Bryce didn't seem to suspect anything. He still wasn't home much, staying late at work or meeting with clients. Olivia, on the other hand, was spending more time in the house, often in the company of her mother, continuing her interior improvements. I tried to ignore their actions, knowing that soon none of it would matter. However, it was not possible to completely hide my plans. One evening, as I was sorting through old stuff in the garage, already preparing for the upcoming move, Bryce caught me. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked, looking in amazement at the boxes I was putting tools and memorabilia in. "I'm organizing," I answered, trying to sound casual. "I'd been putting it off for years." Bryce looked at me suspiciously. "It looked like you were about to move." I froze for a moment, then continued packing up the old set of screwdrivers. "All in good time, son. Sooner or later, we all have to move on." "What's that supposed to mean?" There's anxiety in his voice. "Dad, are you up to something?" "Nothing much," I smiled, trying to look carefree. "I just realized that some things needed to be let go." Bryce didn't look convinced, but he didn't insist. He stood for a moment longer, watching me work. Then after muttering something about unfinished business, walked away. I breathed out a sigh of relief, but I realized that the count was now days. Bryce wasn't stupid. He must have suspected something was wrong. I needed to speed things up. Luckily, Lana didn't let me down. 2 days after we spoke, she called with good news. "Gilbert, I have a potential buyer," she said. "He's seen the pictures of the house and is very interested. He wants to see it as soon as possible." "Who is he?" I asked, stepping farther away from the house so the conversation wouldn't be overheard. "Wesley Noble," Lana answered. "Businessman, bachelor, recently moved to Vallejo from San Francisco. Looking for a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood." "Sounds like a good fit," I said. "When does he want to come?" "Tomorrow, if you don't mind. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon." I mentally went over the household's plans for tomorrow. Bryce was supposed to be at work, and Olivia mentioned meeting some friends at the beauty parlor. "Tomorrow at 3 would be perfect," I confirmed. "Great." Lana sounded enthusiastic. "This buyer is very promising, Gilbert. He has cash, and he's not tied up in mortgages or selling other properties. If he likes the house, we can close the deal very quickly." Just what I needed to hear. The next day, I spent the morning getting the house in order. I dusted, vacuumed the carpets, even arranged fresh flowers from the garden in vases. Although I had decided to sell the house out of resentment and disappointment, I was still proud of it and wanted to present it in the best light. At exactly 3 o'clock, Lana's car pulled up, followed by an impressive black Lexus. Out of it came a man of about 45, tall, trim, in an expensive but restrained suit. It was Wesley Noble. "Mr. Tanner," he extended his hand to shake mine. "It's nice to meet you. Your house looks impressive, even from the outside." "Thank you," I replied, noting his firm handshake. "I put a lot of work into it. You can feel it." Noble nodded. "It's rare to find such thorough work these days." We spent the next hour looking around the house and grounds. Wesley asked intelligent, specific questions about construction, materials, and engineering systems. It was obvious that he knows real estate and appreciates quality. "I built this house myself," I said proudly as we walked out into the garden. "I planned every detail with longevity and comfort in mind." "You can see that," Noble nodded respectfully. "It's a rare quality in the modern world to build for the ages, not for a quick sale." We returned to the living room, where Lana invited us to sit down to discuss the details. "Mr. Noble," she began, "as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Tanner's interested in a quick sale. Of course, that doesn't mean he's willing to make a significant price reduction, but—" "I understand," Wesley interrupted, "and I appreciate the candor." He turned to me. "Mr. Tanner, your house is exactly what I was looking for. It's built with love and attention to detail. I'm willing to pay the asking price without bargaining, but I do have one condition." "What is it?" I asked, surprised by his directness. "I want a quick deal. I want it fast. And I want to move in as soon as the paperwork is done." I glanced over at Lana. This was even better than I'd hoped. "How fast?" I asked. 3 days, Noble answered. "I can wire the money tomorrow if we hit the ground running today. My lawyers will expedite the paperwork. In 3 days, the house will be officially mine." 3 days. So soon. I wasn't sure I was ready psychologically, but it was the perfect offer from a practical standpoint. "There is one detail," I said after a pause. "My son and his wife are living in the house now. They don't know about the sale yet." Noble's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained a nonchalant expression. "I know it's a delicate situation, Mr. Tanner, but it's important for me to move in as soon as the deal is finalized. Do you have a plan for the current tenants?" I had a plan. Not the kindest, not the fairest, but the only one possible under the circumstances. "Yes," I said firmly. "By the time the deal was finalized, everything would be settled." Noble looked at me carefully, then nodded. "In that case, I think we have a deal." We shook hands and Lana cheerfully announced that she would have the necessary paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. When Noble and Lana left, I was alone in the living room, staring at the walls of the house that would soon no longer be mine. A strange feeling took over me, a mixture of sadness, relief, and fear of the unknown. I realized that I was committing an act that would forever change my relationship with my son. Bryce might never forgive me. I might lose him forever. The thought caused almost physical pain, but at the same time, I felt there was no other option. I couldn't go on living in an atmosphere of constant humiliation and neglect. I couldn't stand the way Olivia and her mother were methodically destroying everything I cared about. I couldn't let them drive me out of the house I'd built with my own hands. Besides, somewhere deep inside, there was hope. Maybe this drastic step would make Bryce see the light. Maybe, faced with the consequences of his choices, he'd finally see who Olivia really was. It was a faint hope, but I clung to it. The next 2 days passed like a blur. I signed all the necessary paperwork, got confirmation of the transfer of the money to my account, and arranged for Edwin to handle the legal side of the deal until the end. Everything was going according to plan, fast and smooth. Bryce still didn't suspect anything, though he occasionally caught me with long, questioning glances. Olivia was busy doing her own thing and seemed determined to ignore me after our last conflict, which was only to my advantage. On the third day, with hours to go before the deal was finalized, I began to have doubts. Was I doing the right thing? Was it too cruel to drop this news on my son and his wife without warning? Shouldn't I at least talk to Bryce beforehand? Give him a chance to prepare? I had almost decided to have a frank conversation when I happened to overhear Olivia's phone conversation with her mother. They didn't know that I had come home earlier than usual and was in the next room. "Mom, I don't know what's going on with him," Olivia said. "He's acting weird, hiding something." Bryce had noticed too. "Maybe he'd finally decided to listen to reason," Veronica suggested on the other end of the line, her voice coming through the speakerphone. "Maybe he's looking for an apartment or a nursing home." "I don't think so," Olivia snorted. "You know how stubborn he is. He'd rather die than leave this house willingly." "Well," Veronica's voice was quieter, but I could still make out the words, "we may have to be more forceful." "Did you talk to Bryce about the medical exam?" "Not yet," Olivia said. "But after the photo incident, I have an argument. I can convince Bryce that his father is becoming unstable and dangerous, that he needs professional help." "That's a good idea," Veronica said. "If dementia or another mental disorder is confirmed, you can get custody of the house without his consent." "Exactly," Olivia sounded pleased. It was time to end this comedy and start living like a human being. I stepped away from the door, my blood churning in my veins. They were planning to declare me insane, incapacitated, lock me in a mental institution or a nursing home to take possession of my house. And Bryce, would he really agree to that? My son, my flesh and blood? I didn't want to believe it, but after everything that had happened in the last few months, I couldn't be sure. In that moment, all doubt vanished. I had made the right choice. Selling the house wasn't just an act of revenge or self-gratification. It was self-defense. The only way to avoid the fate they had planned for me. That evening, Edwin called with confirmation. All the paperwork was done. The deal was finalized. The house officially belonged to Wesley Noble, and I received a sum of money that would be enough to live on for the rest of my life. "What now?" Edwin asked. "Have you told your son yet?" "No," I answered, "but I will soon, very soon." We'd arranged for Wesley to arrive at the house tomorrow afternoon, the perfect time for Olivia and her mother to return from shopping. I planned to meet them at the gate and break the news. Falling asleep for the last time in my bedroom, in a house that no longer belonged to me, I felt strangely calm. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter of my life. Unpredictable, frightening, but free from the humiliation and manipulation I had endured over the past years. I didn't know where I would go after tomorrow. I didn't know if my son would ever forgive me. I didn't know if I would ever regret my decision. But one thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer let anyone take away my dignity and control over my own life, even if the cost was prohibitive. The morning of the last day in my house was surprisingly clear. The sunlight was streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to pull the night before, painting fanciful patterns on the floor. I woke up early, long before the rest of the house, and lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, mentally saying goodbye to every corner, every crack, every sound I'd grown accustomed to over the decades. When I got out of bed, I took a leisurely shower, shaved, and put on a fresh shirt and pants. Not my everyday home clothes, but what I usually wore to important meetings. Today was a special day, and I wanted to look accordingly. Going down to the kitchen, I made coffee and toast. My usual breakfast, which today seemed like a rite of passage. I ate slowly, savoring every sip, every bite, looking out the window at the garden drenched in morning dew. The roses I had so carefully pruned and fed were blooming lushly and brightly, like a parting gift. When I finished with breakfast, the house was still quiet. Bryce had left for work early. He had an important meeting with a potential client in a neighboring town and didn't plan to be back until the evening. Olivia and Veronica were going shopping, as usual on Wednesdays. I'd heard them talking the day before about some special discounts at the mall. A perfect set of circumstances for what I had planned. I had a few hours to finalize the last preparations and wait for the new homeowner. I decided to use this time to gather the most important personal items, photos, documents, a few mementos. Everything of real value to me fit into 2 small boxes and 1 suitcase. It was surprising how few material items turned out to be truly important. Olivia and Veronica left the house around 10 o'clock. I watched from the bedroom window as they got into the car. Olivia driving, her mother in the passenger seat, both chatting animatedly, unaware that today would change everything. I didn't feel any gloating as I watched them, just the strange, detached calm of someone who'd made a difficult but necessary decision. When their car was around the corner, I went downstairs and walked through the house, checking to see if I'd forgotten anything important. In the living room, I stopped in front of the new abstract painting that Olivia had hung in place of our wedding picture with Eliza. After a little hesitation, I took it off the wall, pulled our picture out of the closet, and returned it to its rightful place. Let this be my last change in the interior, a kind of farewell gesture. Then I carried the boxes and suitcase out onto the porch and sat in the rocking chair, watching the road. Wesley Noble was to arrive at 1 o'clock to get the keys and inspect his now new acquisition. Olivia and Veronica usually returned from shopping between 2 and 3 o'clock, especially if they had lunch at the mall. Bryce, if all went according to his plan, wouldn't show up until 6 in the evening. Time stretched slowly. I leafed through an old photo album I'd left on top of one of the boxes, the last pictures of our family when we were truly happy. Eliza, always elegant even in homemade clothes. Bryce the teenager, with his unchanging smile and clear-eyed gaze. Myself, not yet gray then, with confidence in my eyes and without that bitter crease at my mouth that had appeared in recent years. At exactly 1 o'clock, Wesley Noble's black Lexus showed up in the driveway. The car stopped smoothly at the gate, and the new owner of the house got out, trim, confident, in an impeccable suit, despite the informal occasion. "Good afternoon, Mr. Tanner," he said, coming up on the porch. "Are you ready yet?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Noble." I rose from my chair, shaking his hand. "Yes, I'm ready. Here are the keys to all the doors." I held out a small bundle. "I've prepared for you a folder with information about the house, instructions for appliances, contacts of trusted craftsmen, wiring diagrams, specifics of the heating system, gardening schedule." "That's very thoughtful of you." Noble accepted the folder with respect. "Not every seller takes such care of the new owner." "This house has been an important part of my life," I replied simply. "I want it to be properly taken care of." Wesley nodded with understanding. "I appreciate that, Mr. Tanner. And I promise to treat your home with the respect it deserves." "It's your home now, Mr. Noble," I corrected him, "and I'm glad it's going into good hands." We went inside and I gave the new owner a brief tour, showing him the layout, talking about recent renovations and potential areas that needed attention. Noble listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "What about the furniture?" he asked when we returned to the living room. "Are you taking everything with you?" "Only the personal belongings," I answered. "The furniture stays as we agreed. Most of it is built in, and I made it myself especially for these rooms." "Ah, great work," Wesley praised sincerely, running his hand over the wooden panel of the bookcase. "You don't see quality like that much these days." We continued to walk around the house, discussing details, and soon I noticed that it was getting close to 2 o'clock. Olivia and Veronica could return at any moment. "Mr. Noble," I began as we returned to the porch, "as I mentioned earlier, my son and his wife don't know about the sale of the house yet. They should be back shortly." "I remember," Wesley nodded. "Do you want me to leave before they arrive?" I shook my head. "No, I'd rather you stay. Your presence, will make the situation more real for them. Wesley looked at me carefully and understanding flashed in his eyes. You're not just selling the house. You're sending a message. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. You could say that. The last few years have been difficult. This house has gone from a safe haven to a battlefield. I'm tired of fighting. Noble was silent for a moment, then nodded without further explanation. We sat in chairs on the porch, looking out at the road and having a leisurely conversation about the weather, about Wesley's plans for the house, about my intentions for the future. I told him that I had found a small but comfortable apartment in a neighboring town, close enough to keep in touch with the places I was used to, but far enough away to start a new chapter of my life. Wesley shared his ideas for modernizing the kitchen and setting up a home office on the second floor. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. I looked at my watch. It was about 2:30, right on schedule. They're back, I said, straightening up in my chair. Olivia's car stopped at the gate next to Noble's Lexus. Through the windshield, I could see her and Veronica looking at the unfamiliar vehicle in surprise. Then both women got out, laden with shopping bags, and headed toward the house, still staring at the strange car in bewilderment. When they saw me and the stranger on the porch, they slowed down. I watched Olivia's expression change from bewilderment to suspicion, then to wariness. Gilbert, she called out, coming up the steps. What's going on? Who is that man? I rose slowly from my chair, feeling a strange calm inside. The moment I'd been waiting for and dreading had finally arrived. Olivia, Veronica, I said in a steady voice, I'd like you to meet Wesley Noble, the new owner of this house. There was silence for a moment. Olivia froze with the bags in her hands, her eyes wide with shock. Veronica shifted her gaze from me to Wesley and back again, clearly not understanding the meaning of my words. What are you talking about? Olivia finally squeezed out. What new owner? Exactly what you're hearing, I replied calmly. I sold the house to Mr. Noble. The deal was finalized yesterday. All the papers are signed. The house no longer belongs to me or Bryce. That's impossible, Olivia laughed nervously, but there was no mirth in her laugh. You couldn't sell the house. Bryce owns half of it. You have no right to. I do, I interrupted. The deed of gift I'd made to Bryce 5 years ago had been invalidated because of a legal error. The court ruled on it 4 days ago. I owned the house outright, and I had every right to sell it. The bags fell out of Olivia's hands, hitting the porch boards with a thud. Her face went pale, then rapidly reddened with anger. You couldn't, she whispered. You couldn't do this to us. I couldn't, I raised an eyebrow. Could you have threatened to call the police if I didn't leave my own house? Could you have planned to declare me incapacitated so you could gain control of my property? Oh yes, I heard your conversation with your mother. Veronica gasped, pressing her hand to her lips. Olivia gave her a quick glance, then turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. You've been eavesdropping on our conversations? Dash, she hissed. That's disgusting. No more disgusting than planning to put a man in a mental institution for his possessions, I parried. Anyway, it doesn't matter anymore. The house is sold. Mr. Noble is the new owner. And you're just uninvited guests now. Wesley, who had been silently observing our conversation, rose easily from his chair and nodded to the women. Ladies, I realize this is an unexpected situation for you, he said in his deep, calm voice. But Mr. Tanner is right. Legally, I own the house now, and I plan to move in today. This is a nightmare, Veronica muttered, sinking into the nearest chair. An absurd nightmare. Olivia finally seemed to realize the reality of what was happening. Her face contorted with rage. You can't just put us out on the street, she shouted, taking a step toward me. We have rights. We've lived here for years. Bryce is going to be furious when he finds out what you did. I'm not putting anyone out on the street, I replied calmly. Mr. Noble, as the new owner, has every right to decide who lives in his house. I'm only informing you of the sale. And as for Bryce, and I added after a pause, I am ready to explain myself to him, but not with you, never with you again. Olivia stood there, fists clenched, her chest heaving with anger. Suddenly, she grabbed her phone and started dialing. I'm calling Bryce, she announced, right now. He's going to decide what to do about your betrayal. Call him, I nodded. But know this, I'm not backing down. The house is sold. The money has been transferred. The papers are signed. There's no turning back. While Olivia frantically tried to call her husband, Veronica finally came out of her daze and turned to Wesley. Mr. Noble, you seem like a reasonable man. Can't you see what's going on? This old man is taking revenge on his son and daughter-in-law through some kind of legal loophole. It's unfair. Wesley looked at her with polite interest. Ma'am, I bought the house from its rightful owner. All the documents have been checked by my lawyers. The transaction is clean and legal. As for Mr. Tanner's family relations, that's none of my business. He's not answering, Olivia hissed, putting the phone down. He must be in a meeting. Then I suggest you wait for him to return, I said. Mr. Noble, I think the ladies need some time to process the situation. Perhaps we should go inside? The new owner nodded and we walked into the living room together, leaving Olivia and Veronica on the porch. Through the window I could see my sister-in-law still dialing her husband's number, and her mother comfortingly stroking her shoulder, whispering something in her ear. It's a pretty tense situation, Mr. Tanner, Wesley said as we settled into the living room. Yes, I agreed, but unavoidable. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of this performance. You're welcome, he smiled slightly. After all, I got a nice house at a good price. Did you? And I got my freedom, I answered after a pause. At a high price, but it was worth it. We spent the next hour discussing the final details of the house transfer. I showed Wesley how the irrigation system in the garden worked, where the power panel was, how to regulate the heating in the different rooms. Ordinary, practical things that helped take my mind off the dramatic situation unfolding before my eyes. Olivia and Veronica eventually entered the house, but kept apart from us, whispering in the kitchen. I could hear scraps of their conversation. Olivia was still trying to get Bryce on the phone, and Veronica was frantically discussing some legal options that might help challenge the deal. The front door slammed and we all turned around. Bryce was standing in the hallway looking puzzled at the suitcase and boxes stacked against the wall. What's going on? He asked, entering the living room and stopping at the sight of Wesley. Dad? Who's that man? Bryce! Olivia rushed to her husband, grabbing his arms. Your father's gone crazy. He sold the house. He sold it without your consent to some stranger. My son froze, his eyes flicked from my wife to me, then to Wesley, then back to me. What? He breathed out. Dad, is it true? I straightened, looking my son straight in the eye. Yes, Bryce. I sold the house to Mr. Noble. He's the rightful owner now. But how? How could you? Bryce sounded genuinely puzzled. I own half the house. You rewrote it yourself. The deed of gift was invalidated, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a legal error in it. The court ruled 4 days ago. And you didn't even tell me? There was resentment in his tone now. No warning? Did you warn me when your wife threatened to call the police if I didn't leave my own house? I answered a question with a question. Did you warn me when you and she planned to evict me to the garage or the basement? Or when she decided to declare me incompetent to gain control of the house? Bryce looked shocked. What are you talking about? Olivia never... She lied to you, son, I said softly. Or you're lying to yourself. Either way, the decision has been made and carried out. The house is sold. Mr. Noble moves in today. What about us? There's a note of panic in Bryce's voice. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my question, I shrugged. Maybe Mr. Noble will let you stay for a few days while you look for a new place to live. It's his decision. Wesley, who had been watching the family drama in silence all this time, finally intervened. I realize this is a difficult situation. I can give you a week to find a new place to live, but no more than that. I have my own plans for this house. A week? Olivia exclaimed. Are you kidding me? We need more time. A month at least. I'm afraid that's impossible, Wesley said firmly. A week is my final offer. Bryce looked utterly crushed. He sank down on the couch, wrapping his arms around his head. I can't believe this is happening, he muttered. Dad, how could you do this to us? Just like you've been doing to me for the last few years, I answered, feeling a lump in my throat, taking away what I cared about step by step, my space, my habits, my memories, my freedom. We just wanted a normal life, Olivia exclaimed. Without the old things, without the smell of mothballs, without your endless stories about the past. Exactly, I said quietly. You wanted to live without me. Well, now you've gotten what you wanted. I'm leaving. I headed for the door where my stuff was. Wait, Bryce got up from the couch. You can't just leave. We have to talk. Find a way out. There's no way out, son. I turned around, looking at him with a sad smile. At least not the way out you're hoping for. The house is sold. The money has been transferred. The papers have been signed. That's reality, and we're all going to have to live with it. I'll sue, Olivia intervened. I'll prove that you're mentally unstable, that you didn't know what you were doing. Try, I said calmly. My friend Edwin is one of the best lawyers in the state. He will represent my interests. And by the way, I pulled a small tape recorder out of my pocket. I have a recording of your conversation with your mother, where you discuss how to declare me incompetent to take control of the house. Olivia's face went pale. You wouldn't dare use that. I wouldn't dare, I grinned bitterly. And you wouldn't dare pursue me through the courts. Think of it as a mutual deterrent. I turned to Wesley. Mr. Noble, thank you for your patience. The house is all yours now. I hope it brings you more happiness than it has brought me in recent years. The new owner nodded. I'm sure it will, Mr. Tanner. Good luck in your new place. I picked up my suitcase and one of the boxes. Bryce took the other, automatically stepping forward to help. Where are you going to go? He asked quietly as we stepped out onto the porch. I have an apartment in Benicia, I answered. It's small, but it's cozy. It'll be enough for me. We reached my car and I opened the trunk. Bryce set the box next to mine, then turned, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. A mixture of anger, resentment, confusion, and maybe a glimmer of understanding. Do you really think you had no other choice? He asked. I tried every other option, I answered, closing the trunk. Tried talking to you, trying to compromise, trying to set boundaries. Nothing worked. There was no more room in this house for me, the real me, not the obedient puppet your wife wanted me to be. You could have told me it was that bad, Bryce's voice held genuine pain. I would have understood. You would have? I looked him in the eye. Would you have chosen me over her? He didn't answer, and that was enough. Goodbye, son. I got behind the wheel. I hope you learn a lesson from all this. And maybe someday we can have a real conversation without Olivia between us. I started the engine and slowly pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw Bryce standing in the middle of the driveway, staring after my car. Olivia and Veronica were on the porch, both with looks of shock and outrage on their faces. And in the doorway of the house, not my house anymore, was Wesley Noble, the new owner, watching the final scene of this family drama. I pulled into the driveway without looking back. A strange feeling filled me, a mixture of sadness, relief, and something resembling hope. I'd lost the house I'd built with my own hands, lost the son I loved more than life. But perhaps for the first time in a long time, I had found myself. The road ahead was to Benicia, to a new apartment, to a new life. What it would be, I didn't know. 3 months had passed since the day I left behind the house I had built with my own hands and the family that had ceased to be mine long before. My new apartment in Benicia turned out to be exactly what I needed. Small but bright, on the 3rd floor of a building overlooking a park. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a kitchen with a dining nook, and, most importantly, a balcony where I could grow flowers and drink my morning coffee. The first weeks in the new place, I hardly left the house, organizing and getting used to the new rhythm of life. I set up the few things I'd brought with me, bought new furniture, and settled in. Edwin visited me a few times, bringing me home-cooked meals that his wife had made, asking if I needed help. But I managed on my own. It wasn't the first time I'd had to start my life from scratch. The money from the sale of the house was almost untouched. I withdrew only a small amount for the first expenses: furniture, appliances, clothes. The rest I decided to keep as a safety cushion and perhaps an inheritance for Bryce, should our relationship ever recover. I thought about my son often, not about what he had become in recent years under Olivia's influence, but about the little smiling boy who looked at me with adoration, the teenager who shared his dreams, the young man who came over every Sunday for lunch, even when he moved into his own apartment. Somewhere inside that grown, estranged man was still my son, and I hoped that one day he would find his way back to me. Bryce called me a week after I moved in. The conversation was short and intense. "How are you settling in?" he asked after exchanging formal greetings. "It's fine," I replied. "The apartment is comfortable. The neighbors are quiet. And you?" "We," he paused. "We're temporarily staying with Olivia's mom. We're looking for options." "I understand," I said. "I hope you find something suitable." There was an awkward silence which Bryce broke with a sudden question. "Why, Dad? Why didn't you talk to me before you made such a drastic step?" I sighed, gathering my thoughts. "I tried to talk to you many times, son. You wouldn't hear, or didn't want to hear." "It's not fair," he said, a hint of resentment in his voice. "I've always listened." "To who?" I interrupted. "Me or Olivia? When was the last time you took my side in an argument? When was the last time you noticed me being forced out of my own home? Being disenfranchised, humiliated? You chose not to see, Bryce. And I was tired of being invisible." He didn't answer, and I could only hear his heavy breathing on the other end of the line. "I don't expect you to understand or accept my decision," I continued after a pause. "But I hope that someday you'll at least think about how we got to this point." "Olivia's suing," Bryce said suddenly. "She thinks the deal could be challenged." "I know," I replied calmly. "Edwin's already gotten the notice. But it's pointless, son. All the documents are in order. All the procedures have been followed. She'll only waste your money and your time." I tried to talk her out of it. He sounded tired. "But you know how stubborn she is." "Stubborn?" "I know," I agreed. "I know, and now you do too. Maybe that's the only positive outcome of this whole thing." The conversation ended shortly thereafter, leaving me with a bitter aftertaste. I didn't feel schadenfreude at Bryce and Olivia's predicament, but there was no regret either. They had made their choices long before I had made mine. As predicted, Olivia's lawsuit was dismissed a month later. Edwin called to tell me the news, though I never doubted the outcome. The judge was very clear, my friend told me. The deal was perfectly legal. There's no reason to cancel it. "What about Bryce?" I asked. "Was he present at the hearing?" "Yes," Edwin answered after a short pause. "He didn't look well. Exhausted, I'd say." Olivia made a scene after the decision was announced, yelling about injustice and corruption. Bryce tried to calm her down, but without much success. I shook my head, even though Edwin couldn't see it. Hopefully this would be a lesson to him. Maybe, there was doubt in my friend's voice. But some people need a lot of lessons before they learn. After the trial, Bryce stopped calling. I only knew what was going on in his life from occasional conversations with mutual acquaintances. He and Olivia rented a small house on the outskirts of Vallejo, much more modest than the one they'd lived in before. Veronica had moved in with them, supposedly temporarily, but apparently she was sticking around. Bryce was working more and more, taking extra orders, coming home late. Classic picture of a man who avoids going back to a place where nothing good awaits him. I felt no joy at this news, but no pity either. Each of us reaps the rewards of our own choices. I chose freedom at the cost of losing my home and my relationship with my son. Bryce chose Olivia at the cost of a relationship with me and possibly his own happiness. A fair trade if you think about it. My own life was slowly getting better. At 68, it wasn't easy to start from scratch, but I had a financial cushion, my health, and most importantly, a clear understanding of what I wanted and didn't want in my life. I started going to a local community center that had meetings for seniors. Not because I felt lonely, but just to expand my social circle. There were interesting lectures, concerts, and book discussions. To my surprise, I found that I enjoyed socializing with new people, sharing experiences, learning new things. It was at the community center, at a lecture on gardening, that I met Lydia Coleman, a widow about my age, with lively brown eyes and short-cropped gray hair. She asked intelligent questions about proper rose care, and I couldn't help but step in, sharing my experience. "You obviously know what you're talking about," she said after the lecture, as we found ourselves sitting next to a table with refreshments. "How long have you been gardening?" "All my life," I replied with a smile. "Although the last few months I've had to confine myself to pots on the balcony." "Oh, I know exactly what you mean," Lydia nodded. "I have the same situation. I sold my house after my husband died, And now all my plants are on windowsills and balconies. But you know there's a beauty in it. Every flower's in plain sight. Everyone can be given attention. We got to talking. It turned out that Lydia was a literature teacher who retired 5 years ago. Her husband had died of a heart attack about the same time Eliza had died of cancer. She had 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren, all living in other states and visiting her several times a year. We exchanged phone numbers, and a couple of days later I called, inviting her for a walk in the city park. She agreed without hesitation. We wandered through the alleys, discussing books, movies, politics, everything except our former families. We kept quiet about them by unspoken agreement, realizing that these stories were too complicated for the early stages of dating. Our meetings became regular. We went to small cafes, visited exhibitions at the local gallery, sometimes just sat on a park bench, watching the ducks on the pond and discussing everything in the world. Lydia was an intelligent, well-read woman with a subtle sense of humor and a healthy skepticism about life. She reminded me of Eliza, but she was not a copy of her. She had her own special character, her own story, her own way of looking at the world. One day, about 2 months after we had met, while walking along the promenade, Lydia suddenly stopped and turned to me. "Gilbert, I have to ask you something," she said gravely, "and I want you to be honest with me." Of course, I was a little puzzled by her tone. "What happened between you and your family?" she asked bluntly. "You never talk about your son, even though I know he exists. You don't show me pictures. You don't tell me stories. That's, unusual for someone your age." I took a deep breath. Sooner or later that question was going to come up, and Lydia deserved an honest answer. "It's a long story, and not a pleasant one," I warned. "I have time," she replied simply, "and I've seen enough unpleasant stories in my life not to be frightened by another one." We sat on a bench overlooking the bay, and I told her everything. The house I'd built with my own hands, the years I'd lived happily with Eliza and Bryce, the way things had changed after my son married, the gradual displacement of me from my own home and family, the humiliation and manipulation, the last straw when I threatened to call the police, and, finally, my decision to sell the house and start a new life. Lydia listened attentively without interrupting, only occasionally nodding or shaking her head. When I finished, she stared at the water for a long time, then turned to me. "I understand you better than you can imagine," she said quietly. "I had a similar situation with my daughter and son-in-law. Not as dramatic, but I know what it's like to feel like an outsider in your own home, in your own life." "And what did you do?" I asked, surprised by this revelation. "I didn't sell the house," she smiled weakly. "But I set clear boundaries. When that didn't work, I just told them they couldn't live with me anymore." It was hard seeing the disappointment and resentment in my own child's eyes. "But necessary. Are you in a relationship now?" "Yes, but from a distance, and on my terms." Lydia looked me straight in the eye. "Sometimes you have to lose something to keep the most important things. Self-respect, freedom, peace. You did what you thought was necessary, and judging by the way you are now, it was the right decision." "What am I like now?" I asked with interest. "Calm, confident, real." She touched my hand lightly. "A man who didn't let circumstances or other people define his life." Her words touched me more deeply than I could have expected. For the first time since I'd sold the house, I felt complete confirmation that I'd made the right choice. Not from myself, not from Edwin, but from an outsider who looked at the situation with fresh eyes and yet understood. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "For what?" She raised her eyebrows. "For understanding, for not judging, for—" I hesitated, searching for the words, "for seeing me." Lydia smiled, and there was so much warmth in that smile that I felt something inside me thaw, something that had remained frozen even after moving and starting a new life. After that conversation, our relationship went to the next level. We became closer, more honest with each other. I told her about Eliza, about our life, about how hard it was to lose a life partner after so many years together. She shared her memories of her husband, their travels, shared hobbies, and how she was coping with the loss. In early December, as the first snow covered the streets of Benicia, Lydia invited me to her home for dinner. Her apartment turned out to be a cozy nest filled with books, paintings, and of course, flowers. They stood on every windowsill, hung in cash pose, took pride of place on shelves and tables. "It's an impressive collection," I said, looking around. "It's my little passion," she admitted with a smile. "Every time I feel lonely, I buy a new plant. So now I have a whole botanical garden." Dinner was excellent. Lydia was a great cook. We sat at the table, drank wine, talked about everything in the world, and I felt as comfortable as I had felt in a long time. After dinner, as we settled in the living room with cups of tea, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar and I almost ignored the call, but something made me answer it. Dad? Bryce's voice sounded unsure, like he doubted I'd answer. "Yes, son." I stood up and stepped back to the window, glancing apologetically at Lydia. She nodded understandingly and quietly left the room, giving me privacy. "How are you doing?" Bryce asked after a pause. "Good," I answered honestly. "Really good even. How about you?" "I'm fine," he paused. Dad, I'm calling because..." Another pause. "Olivia and I are breaking up." The news took me by surprise. I didn't know what to say, so I just asked, "What's wrong?" "A lot." He sounded tired. "Shilira, after we lost the house, everything went downhill. She became even more controlling, demanding. Her mother was always interfering, giving advice, criticizing me. I felt..." He paused, searching for words. "Like you, I guess." Trapped. Invisible in my own home. "I'm sorry," I said, and it was the truth. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want my son to be unhappy. "You know what the ironic thing is?" Bryce continued with a bitter chuckle in his voice. "I only understood you when I was in your shoes. I realized why you did what you did." "Better late than never," I said softly. "Yes," he agreed. "Dad, I wanted to apologize for not seeing what was going on, for not protecting you, for letting Olivia push you out of your own home." Those words touched me to the core. I hadn't expected to hear them, at least not so soon, not under these circumstances. "Thank you, son," I said, struggling to contain my emotions. "It means a lot to me." "I wish..." He hesitated. "I'd like to see you. Have a normal conversation. If you want to, of course." "Of course," I answered without hesitation. "When would be convenient for you?" "Maybe this weekend?" "I can come to Benicia." "It's a deal." I smiled, though Bryce couldn't see it. "I'll be waiting." After the conversation ended, I stood at the window, looking out at the falling snow and trying to make sense of what had happened. I felt no gloating at the news of the breakup of my son's marriage, only sadness at the pain he had to go through and hope that now our relationship could begin to recover. Lydia came quietly back into the room, carrying freshly brewed tea. "Is everything all right?" she asked, setting the cups on the table. "Yes," I turned to her. "It was my son. He and his wife are separating, and he wants to meet." "That's good," she said simply. "The beginning of a new chapter." "Yes," I agreed, turning back to the couch. "A new chapter for all of us." We sat side by side, sipping our tea and staring at the city lights outside the window. In that moment, I felt a deep calm and confidence that everything would turn out right. Not perfect. Things are rarely perfect in life, but right. My new life was far from what I had envisioned when I planned the future years ago. No big house built with my own hands, no daily interaction with my son and his family, no familiar surroundings and activities. Instead, a small apartment, new friends, new interests, and perhaps new relationships that were just beginning to form. But in this new life was something I had sorely lacked in recent years: dignity, freedom, and the opportunity to be myself. I was no longer invisible, no longer a burden, no longer a problem to be solved. I was just Gilbert Tanner, a man who had lived a long life, made many mistakes, but had ultimately found the strength to stand up for himself and start over. And sitting next to Lydia in her cozy apartment, looking at the snow falling outside the window, I realized that I had no regrets. The price was high, the house, the relationship with my son, which was only now beginning to recover. But what I got in return was worth every loss, every sleepless night, every hard decision. I got me, and that was the most valuable thing I could have gotten.